At what point did you make the connection between this ESP telepathy stuff and folks with autism?
Well, so as I mentioned earlier, I really was interested in savant syndrome, and these case reports of people who knew things that we just like how do they know that, and I read Oliver Sacks' book The Man Who Mistook His Wife for a Hat back in 1986. I met Oliver Sacks back then. He
really?
He came to Johns Hopkins, and I attended his lecture, and then we had a private sort of. I was on the social and cultural affairs committee as a student, and so I got to meet a lot of really interesting people. And I read his book before he came, and I was just so fascinated by these autistic twins who had been admitted to this institution back in the 60s, who could. One of the games they played was to spit out consecutive prime numbers. And they were doing it in 6 digits. And so one of them would say, some 6-digit number, and then the other one would say the next one. And then they would just go back and forth doing consecutive 6-digit prime numbers. And Oliver Sacks came in one day having looked at a prime number table, and he said an 8-digit prime number, and then they looked at one another and like, oh, okay. And then they switched to doing 8-digit prime numbers.
Whoa.
And then he tested them on 12 digits, and they were accurately doing 12-digit prime numbers. And they even gave 20-digit prime numbers, but back then in the 60s, computers couldn't calculate 20-digit prime numbers. And so Sacks was only able to validate it to 12. And they also could do calendar calculation, being able to tell you could give them for thousands of years, forwards and backwards, you could give them a date, and they would tell you what day of the week it was.
How old are these guys?
Oh, they were, at the time he studied them, I think that they were in their like late teens, early 20s. But the thing is that they couldn't do simple arithmetic. And what they said was they just saw the answers. They just saw the answers, and they saw the answers out here in physical space, just like,
Floating in space?
Yeah, just floating in space, like a hallucination. And just like, who hallucinates, 12 and 20-digit prime numbers? And so I thought that's really fascinating. And then, I learned about Daniel Tammet, who is an autistic savant, who he's won the pi contest, as in pi, the mathematical constant, which is 3.14, blah, 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 blah. That's the ratio of the circumference of a circle to its diameter. Mm-hmm. And he can recite it to over 22,000 digits effortlessly, and he says he never memorized it. He just sees it out here in what we think of as physical space. And so when in 5 hours he's just visualizing the numbers as complex landscapes with colors and shapes, and I thought that's very similar. And so it really got me to thinking about the nature of reality and where information, is where is information stored? But
I remember seeing a documentary on this guy.
Yeah, but the other thing is that savant syndrome is found predominantly in 2 populations, and one population is individuals who are autistic, and the other population is people who are blind. But blind congenitally. And so those are both conditions in which there's something different about the wiring of their brain, where there's something that there are things that they can't do, like in blind, people, obviously it's that they can't see, but with autistic people, there's certain things that they struggle to do. I think that like these autistic individuals who were institutionalized that Sachs studied, I think they couldn't even tie their shoes or something. Just a lot of basic things, and yet their brains somehow wired that they can do these kinds of things that we don't really have good algorithms for. I mean, they can do these things faster than a mathematician even who's given an algorithm. And so it's not that they are deriving the answers or calculating them. It's perceptual, and it's hard to wrap your head around. But to me, that was like a clue that if I want to sort of crack the code for consciousness, the way to do so is to study these autistic savants who can reliably demonstrate these abilities that we would consider just as impossible if it wasn't for the fact that they're so reliably demonstrated and have been demonstrated by more than one individual. And so that's why I started studying autistic savants. And then I've been studying autism since 1987.
Oh, really?
So after I met Oliver Sacks, I won a fellowship to go to the Institute of London the Institute of Psychiatry in London and work with Michael Rutter, who was knighted for his work on autism afterwards. But because he was the world expert on autism at the time. And
really?
Yes. And I was fascinated by neurodevelopmental conditions as a way of trying to understand this relationship between the brain and consciousness. So instead of going into neurosurgery, where a lot of your time as a neurosurgeon isn't spent doing the really interesting stuff, and I decided what I want my bread and butter work to be is neuropsychiatry, where I'm studying neurodevelopmental disorders and neurodegenerative disorders, where something goes on such that people either never acquire an ability, or they kind of acquire it in a quirky way, or they had an ability and they lose it, and then finding the correlations between, what their symptoms, their behaviors are, and their testing on cognitive tests with what we can learn from neuroimaging about their brain function. So that's why I shifted to neuropsychiatry from neurosurgery, but it was always with the same aim. And so I went over there to study these kids with him. And so there were very few people who've been in the field as long as I have. And I realized when I started studying these autistic savants, I realized that they had some abilities that really, sounded a lot like ESP. And I thought, well, accessing information that we don't understand how you access it, why do we accept these things like, generating, prime numbers, and musical talent for somebody who's never been trained. Why do we call that a savant skill? And yet if they can tell you things before they happen, or if they can, see things that are, like something like clairvoyance or remote viewing, if they can do that, it to me, it just is all people accessing information that we don't understand how they're doing it. And so there are some things that I feel that we tend to segment away from one another, and we lose information by treating them as though they're different. And then there's other things that we tend to lump together that I wouldn't lump together. Like I wouldn't have created autism spectrum disorder, because that's really multiple different conditions all lumped under one label, and that confuses things. But to me, I think it actually brings more clarity if we just look at a lot of these phenomena that are like accessing non-local information as being really probably something that it's telling us that our way of conceptualizing information and how the brain accesses it is it's fundamentally flawed within the materialist model. with the autistics, that individuals that I've worked with, I mean, they get 95, 97% accuracy on things that chance might be.
Like what, for example? Like, how does it work? Like, give me an example of like one exercise that they would get that high level accuracy on.
Oh, well, there was this girl named Haley that I did 6 hours worth of research on, and she had that kind of accuracy. And I did everything from using a random number generator to generate 6-digit random numbers. Mm-hmm. Okay. So, and just doing, I did, like, there was one run where it was like 167, digits. Mm-hmm. And she only missed 7. No, it was 172, and she only missed 7. She got 165 of those right.
Wow.
Now, and it's just like, okay, something's going on here, And
how many people were in the room?
So it was just Haley and the therapist that she was working with, and then the cameraman and I were in a separate room with camera feeds, and we had cameras on either side, on the ceiling, in front and behind, and then we had a visual barrier between the therapist and Haley, and so it was pretty phenomenal. I mean, and then and she could do this with 2 separate therapists, and how I met Haley was that her father knew Daryl Treffert and knew about mathematical savants, and thought that his daughter was a mathematical savant because she was able to do like all of these amazing mathematical equations, and yet she really hadn't been trained how to do it. And he already knew about savant syndrome, and he thought, oh well, she's a mathematical savant. And then one day when the therapist was working with her, the therapist's calculator died on her, and she had to switch calculators. And the calculator wasn't within eyesight of Haley, and the calculator died on her, and she switched calculators. And the new calculator, until she reset it actually gave the answer in logarithmic notation, which is going to be a different set of numbers. Wow. And so Haley immediately typed the answer in logarithmic notation. Had never done that before. And the therapist's like, well, wait a minute. How'd you know that was in logarithmic notation? And Haley typed, I see the numerators and denominators in your head. And then the therapist said, what? You can read my mind? And she goes, yes. And then she goes, well, okay, if that's the case, then what am I thinking of right now? And she was thinking of that purple dinosaur Barney, and she typed Barney. And then she goes, well, what's the name of my landlord? And then she typed Helmet, and that was the name of her landlord. And she was like, holy cow, and at first she thought she was losing her mind. Mm-hmm. And she was afraid to tell the parents. And so then eventually she did. In the meantime, another therapist that was coming into the home to do work with Haley, she noticed that Haley would do the same. You know how some of us will transpose letters, and we always do that kind of spelling mistake, and and as soon as you see it, it's wrong, and you want to correct it. I mean,
right, like I after E or something like that.
Yeah, that kind of, or people with dyslexia will will do that. And so she would do that kind of a thing, and she would see that Haley would do the same things that she would do, and she's just like, oh, that's funny, you make the same mistakes as me,
Wow.
And she just said, it's funny. It's like you're tapping into my mind, And Haley said, "I am," And she says, "Well, then, if that's so, how do you say I love you in German?" Because this woman was fluent in German as well, and then she types out. Haley had never been exposed to German, and she types out the German for "I love you," and So anyway, so it was after those accounts, and Daryl Treffert knew that I, after having come back from India and having worked with these savants over there, that I was interested in pursuing questions of telepathy, and so I was contacted, and I went out there and I did the studies, in as controlled of a fashion as I could.
Yeah.
And Daryl Treffert's no longer alive, but he was convinced. He publicly went on record saying that he thought that telepathy was a real thing, that it was a savant skill. He was on the same page as me, that really that there's something going on here.
Has it ever been done where one of the children was in a completely opposite part of the house or a different part of the room where there's no visual connection, no line of sight or anything like that, where they're able to read the mind or communicate what the other person's saying or thinking?
No, not really in the way that I would like to see it done. I mean, there's been studies where, how you have these houses where you have a contiguous dining room and living room, and so you've got a huge separation, a separation that's as big as your studio here, so easily, 20, 25 feet separation. Right. Okay. But you still have some visibility between, the person, the mother and child.
Sure.
And
sorry, go ahead. Continue.
Yeah. So that's been one of the things that I recognize that a lot of skeptics, would like to see them in separate rooms, and I would like to see that as well. It's easier said than done because autistic children are so they're very they're OCD. They like things to be the same. They don't like changes to their routine. Mm-hmm. They're really extremely they get dysregulated very, very easily, emotionally dysregulated, and so right. So they just it's really hard to just kind of do that and have them calm and have all of these people there with cameras and
one of the other things that people say is that if you have someone there who is skeptical, it automatically ruins the trick, right? Like they can't do it because there's the energy of somebody who doesn't believe could kind of ruin it, right?
Well, it's okay for somebody if they're an open-minded skeptic.
Okay.
So like you would qualify as that,
right.
you're open-minded, you've got some skepticism, but you're not there as somebody whose job it is to, kind of where you're convinced that it's right. got to be a scam, and your job is to figure out how are they scamming us.
Right, totally.
Which is a totally different kind of energy to introduce into the room.
Even what I would like to see, not just in different rooms, but just a piece of plywood in between them. Right,
well, that's the kind of thing I had.
Me and you could both be here. We just have a giant piece of plywood that goes to the ceiling all the way around, so there's absolutely no way we can see each other. And like one of those mentalists or stage magicians also there, just to observe it and to ask questions and make sure there's no trickery going on.
With the autistics, individuals that I've worked with, they get 95, 97% accuracy on things that, chance might be,
Like what, for example? Like how does it work? Like give me an example of one exercise that they would get that high level accuracy on.
Oh, well, there was this girl named Haley that I did 6 hours worth of research on, and she had that kind of accuracy. And I did everything from using a random number generator to generate 6-digit random numbers. Mm-hmm. Okay. So, and just doing, I did, there was one run where it was 167, digits, and she only missed 7. No, it was 172, and she only missed 7. She got 165 of those right.
Wow.
Now, and it's just like, okay, something's going on here,
And how many people were in the room?
So it was just Haley and the therapist that she was working with, and then the cameraman and I were in a separate room with camera feeds, and we had cameras on either side, on the ceiling, in front and behind, and then we had a visual barrier between the therapist and Haley, and so it was pretty phenomenal. I mean, and then and she could do this with 2 separate therapists, and how I met Haley was that her father knew Daryl Treffert and knew about mathematical savants, and thought that his daughter was a mathematical savant because she was able to do like all of these amazing mathematical equations, and yet she really hadn't been trained how to do it. And he already knew about savant syndrome, and he thought, oh well, she's a mathematical savant. And then one day when the therapist was working with her, the therapist's calculator died on her, and she had to switch calculators. And the calculator wasn't within eyesight of Haley, and the calculator died on her, and she switched calculators. And the new calculator, until she reset it actually gave the answer in logarithmic notation, which is going to be a different set of numbers.
Wow.
And so Haley immediately typed the answer in logarithmic notation. Had never done that before. And the therapist's like, well, wait a minute. How'd you know that was in logarithmic notation? And Haley typed, I see the numerators and denominators in your head. And then the therapist said, what? You can read my mind? And she goes, yes. And then she goes, well, okay, if that's the case, then what am I thinking of right now? And she was thinking of that purple dinosaur Barney, and she typed Barney. And then she goes, well, what's the name of my landlord? And then she typed Helmet, and that was the name of her landlord. And she was like, holy cow, and at first she thought she was losing her mind. Mm-hmm. And she was afraid to tell the parents. And so then eventually she did. In the meantime, another therapist that was coming into the home to do work with Haley, she noticed that Haley would do the same. You know how some of us will transpose letters, and we always do that kind of spelling mistake, and and as soon as you see it, it's wrong, and you want to correct it. I mean,
right, like I after E or something like that.
Yeah, that kind of, or people with dyslexia will will do that. And so she would do that kind of a thing, and she would see that Haley would do the same things that she would do, and she's just like, oh, that's funny, you make the same mistakes as me,
Wow.
And she just said, it's funny. It's like you're tapping into my mind, And Haley said, I am, And she says, well, then if that's so, how do you say I love you in German? Because this woman was fluent in German as well, and then she types out. Haley had never been exposed to German, and she types out the German for I love you. And so anyway, so it was after those accounts, and Daryl Treffert knew that I. After having come back from India and having worked with these savants over there, that I was interested in pursuing questions of telepathy. And so I was contacted, and I went out there, and I did the studies, in as controlled of a fashion as I could.
Yeah.
And Daryl Treffert's no longer alive, but he was convinced. He publicly went on record saying that he thought that telepathy was a real thing, that it was a savant skill. He was on the same page as me, that really that there's something going on here.
Has it ever been done where one of the children was in a completely opposite part of the house or a different part of the room where there's no visual connection, no line of sight or anything like that, where they're able to read the mind or communicate what the other person's saying or thinking?
No, not really in the way that I would like to see it done. I mean,
Right.
there was there's been studies where, you know how you have these houses where you have a contiguous dining room and a living room, and so you've got a huge separation, a separation that's as big as your studio here, so easily, 20, 25 feet separation. Right. Okay. But you still have some visibility between, the person, the mother and child.
Sure.
And
sorry, go ahead. Continue.
Yeah. So that's been one of the things that I recognize that a lot of skeptics, would like to see them in separate rooms, and I would like to see that as well. It's easier said than done because autistic children are so they're very they're OCD. They like things to be the same. They don't like changes to their routine. Mm-hmm. They're really extremely they get dysregulated very, very easily, emotionally dysregulated, and so they just it's really hard to just kind of do that and have them calm and have all of these people there with cameras and
one of the other things that people say is that if you have someone there who is skeptical, it automatically ruins the trick, right? Like they can't do it because there's the energy of somebody who doesn't believe could kind of ruin it, right?
Well, it's okay for somebody if they're an open-minded skeptic.
Okay.
So like you would qualify as that.
Right.
You're open-minded. You've got some skepticism, but you're not there as somebody whose job it is to, kind of where you're convinced that it's got to be a scam, and your job is to figure out how are they scamming us.
Right, totally.
Which is a totally different kind of energy to introduce into the
room.
room.
Even what I would like to see, not just in different rooms, but just a piece of plywood in between them. Right,
well, that's the kind of thing I had.
Me and you could both be here. We just have a giant piece of plywood that goes to the ceiling all the way around, so there's absolutely no way we can see each other. And like one of those mentalists or stage magicians also there, just to observe it and to ask questions and make sure there's no trickery going on.
Yeah, and so one of the things about autistic individuals that made me think that besides savant syndrome, that made me think that they might be the most likely to demonstrate this, was that I looked at when I wrote my book, The ESP Enigma. What I did was I looked at who are all of the where do we find the most reports by people that they experience ESP? Okay, who are these people?
Right.
Okay, and you see a higher incidence of that kind of reporting in people that are artistic and creative. Okay, so the opposite, and you see the least reports in people who are scientific and analytical and logical. And then we also have people who have never had anything, that you would call ESP in their waking life, but they've had a dream occasionally that was precognitive, or it was it contained an after-death communication. These dreams where somebody has a dream about their, grandfather coming to them, and then that morning they find out that, Grandpa died last night. He died at the same time that I had that dream. There's all kinds of reports of that kind of thing. And then there was a lot of research that was done on dream telepathy, and where you had people who'd be sitting in one room looking at a picture or painting and then trying to send it to somebody who was dreaming. And there'd be a researcher who didn't know what the picture was, who would wake up the dreamer, when they could tell that the dreamer had been in REM sleep, and you can tell that because the eyes go back and forth.
Rapid eye movement.
Yeah, and so you wake up the dreamer and just say, what were you just dreaming about? And then they would take that description of what they were dreaming about and compare it with the picture that somebody was sending them. And there was an amazing sort of correspondence between the two. And so I knew that there was something different about the dreaming brain that made it, a state of consciousness where you're in a more receptive mode. And what I kept seeing over and over and over again was the same pattern. And what it was is that and this is oversimplifying what's happening with the hemispheres, but just for simplicity's sake, think of it as the creative and intuitive hemisphere is associated with the right hemisphere, and the analytical and logical and language-based hemisphere is the left hemisphere. And when we're in waking life, our left hemisphere is dominant.
Yes.
And
the
particularly
analytical hemisphere.
I'm sorry?
That's the analytical hemisphere.
Right, yeah. And then in our Western culture, that's also the way that our educational system is set up. It's set up to develop the left hemisphere skills. Everything is, reading, writing, and arithmetic, analytical, logical, right? And it's really de-emphasized the arts and the creative and all of that. Okay, so during the time when the brain is still very plastic and capable of being, shaped into whatever kind of tool we need it for, because it's undergoing all of this capacity for rewiring, depending upon what do we need, what abilities do we need? And just like, as I was saying earlier, like people who are born, congenitally blind, or people who were born with, or quickly within the first couple of years of life lose their ability to speak. There's these, the brain's still rewiring itself to trying to find a workaround for, for whatever it is, so that you can still navigate, this world and get your needs met. And so back to left hemisphere versus right hemisphere, what I realized is that a lot of these savant skills are right hemisphere skills. And the right hemisphere is associated with Gestalt thinking, not this linear verbal thinking. It's associated with, pattern recognition or visual spatial processing. Right. And then in dreaming sleep, the right hemisphere is dominant over the left hemisphere, but also in dreaming sleep, our frontal lobes shut down their activity. And our frontal lobes are what create expectations. And so during dreaming sleep, our dreams can be so magical because we're not the analytical, logical, and sort of setting the expectation and thinking of consequences. All those parts of the brain are shut down, and so it's able to do it's free to access information that gets shut down by people during their waking life, where it's sort of like, well, that can't happen. And so autistic individuals, they're not only are savant skills mainly right hemispheres, but their main deficits are in the left hemisphere. Language, right? The linear things. And so I thought, well, if anybody is going to be able to do this, it's going to be somebody whose brain, when they're in their waking state, is more one of these sort of hybrids, conditions, or either more right hemisphere dominant, or that they're, or they're able to have this kind of, that there's that in hypnosis. what you're trying to do is you're trying to put somebody into kind of more of a hybrid state, or like, that state that you're in just before you wake up and you still can access your dreams, and then they slip away if you don't. It's that state, that kind of twilight kind of state that you're in. And what people try to do in meditation is they try to stay in that state for more than just, a couple of seconds. They're trying to expand that, because when you expand that, you have more access to things that are normally unconscious.
Wow. So what is happening is that state that you're explaining, that twilight state, that's what's happening when you hear about stories of people being put into like a hypnotic regression to like access buried memories or suppressed memories?
Yeah, I mean, what you're doing is you're basically trying to put them into a place where instead of the left, the left hemisphere analytical, logical thing being driving, kind of what we have access to.
Yeah.
You're allowing the unconscious to kind of be, accessed. Yeah, absolutely.
It's like you're somehow opening, you're allowing access to like the encrypted part of the hard drive that your consciousness is not allowed to, like when you're waking consciousness. We still don't know like which parts of the brain hold long-term, short-term. It seems like it might be somehow partitioned off in multiple different parts of the brain memory.
Yeah, so the hippocampus is involved in laying down memory. Okay, and it's the oldest. It's called the archaeocortex. In other words, it's an older cortex than what we think of as the cortex. And the hippocampus is also involved in navigation. Remember several years back when people received the Nobel Prize for discovering sort of the brain's GPS?
No, I don't remember that.
And I wrote about it in my book, The ESP Enigma, and before they got the Nobel Prize for it. Yeah, we have in the hippocampus and in areas adjacent to the hippocampus, like the entorhinal cortex, we have these cells that some of the cells are involved in laying out a grid, which is like a map of physical space. And those cells will start to fire, become active when, say, we are in a certain location. So that, you have maybe a map in your mind of your neighborhood, okay? And there are cells that are associated with different parts of that map that will start becoming active when you're in that area.
Whoa.
Yeah, and then there are also cells that that are involved in like your orientation of what way your head is facing. So they're head position cells, and as I said, there's like these grid cells and place cells. And so it really is an internal mapping system. But the hippocampus is also involved in laying down memory. And it's particularly active in dreaming sleep. It's the source of most of the theta activity, which is, theta is that activity that is at the lower end of the Schumann frequencies, so around 7 hertz. Okay, that's, theta is between 4 and 8 hertz, and 7 hertz, that 7 hertz activity has been associated with things like remote viewing and various psychic abilities. Mm-hmm. Like there was this...
Here, pull them off and then put them back on.
Yeah.
You don't want you to look like you're being electrocuted. There you go.
So like when they did studies on Ingo Swann, who is one of the most famous remote viewers, they saw this very
also a Scientologist. my one of my buddies got me that as a funny joke because this area is synonymous with Scientology. So
is it?
He got me an e-meter as a gift, so we put it up here as a fun prop.
Oh, that's fun. I've never seen one before.
So the idea is you hold on to these things and they go into auditing sessions, and you hold one of these in each hand, and then they ask you questions about your life. Like they do a deep dive psychological review of your life, and you talk about all the negative things that have ever happened to you, your deepest, darkest secrets. So this thing bounces around, and it somehow removes your body thetans, which are like aliens that live inside you.
Oh, I see. Okay, there you go. It's a technological exorcism.
Yes, exactly. And all of the top remote viewers were Scientologists.
Yeah, I know a lot of them were. Yeah, that doesn't surprise me at all. So he had this really very unusual 7 hertz activity in his. I believe it was in his occipital lobe, which, when he was remote viewing, and the occipital lobe is the visual cortex. So there's this association between that sort of frequency, the theta frequency, and dreaming and psychic abilities. And the main source of the theta is the hippocampus. And then the parahippocampal area there was another imaging study that showed that area of the brain would become really very active during these kind of, whether it's remote viewing or, some other kind of, or telepathy. There was research that had shown that area would become more active. And so I'm very interested in it because it made me wonder whether or not the hippocampus could be involved in not just navigating physical space, but actually navigating mental space. If you think of how our memories organized, they're
right.
And I really think that they're actually organized in a field, rather than being organized in the brain. That the brain is our access to that.
Like an antenna.
Yeah, it's sort of like an antenna, but it's more than just an antenna. Yeah. I think of it as being. The way I think of the brain is I think of it as being like our computer. Okay, in terms of it's got computational aspects, but it also think of it as also having an ability to help us surf the net. Surf the cloud. Surf the informational field.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, there was research that was shown by Lashley, who was doing. He was looking at memory, and he was trying to find where's memory, encoded, and so he was removing different parts of a rat's brain.
Yeah.
And what he found was that it wasn't the location of where he removed brain tissue that determined loss of memory. It was more the amount of brain tissue you took away, and so
interesting.
And so he really he believed that there was sort of some kind of holographic component to it, but getting back to the hippocampus and memory, though, it is true that the hippocampus plays a role in converting short-term memory into long-term memory, and so the hippocampus is extremely metabolically active. It has very high need for oxygen, for example. Anything that's metabolically active needs more oxygen. And so if somebody has something happen that interferes with oxygen, so for example, carbon monoxide poisoning, which affects the ability of blood to, give you, or cyanide poisoning, it affects the ability of blood to carry oxygen and then deliver it where it's needed. Well, people who've survived carbon monoxide poisoning, they've trashed their hippocampus. And I remember seeing patients like this, or people who had suffocated and then been brought back to life from some other source of, like drowning or some other source of suffocation. They oftentimes they cannot form new memories, and it's because their hippocampi have been wiped out. And I've had I've had patients like that, and it really is like every single day. I had this one woman who her husband tried to kill her, and he tried to kill her by choking her, and she survived it. And he ended up in one psych ward because at Hopkins because of having been murderous, and she ended up under my care. And what happened is that when he got out of the psych hospital, he killed himself because he
in prison or something.
Well, he didn't go to prison. He didn't go to prison. No, he was considered mentally ill, and he did not go to prison. I know it's hard to believe, isn't it? But he did not go to prison. He was out on some kind of bail, having been evaluated psychiatrically. But anyway, but he killed himself.
Right.
And every day when I'd go in to see this woman, she'd ask me why her husband wasn't coming to visit her. And I would have to tell her that he's no longer alive. And she would cry as though she was hearing the information for the first time, each time. And after a while, I just thought, I'm not going to put this woman through this anymore. Something. The reason why I tell that story is because if there's anything you're going to remember, it's going to be something like that your husband's no longer alive, and that you've grieved them and cried over it.
And every day you're putting her through the most psychological pain she could imagine.
And so I realized it's not, I'm not going to do that.
So what did you start telling her?
I just said, I don't know. You haven't heard from him. She said, no, I haven't heard from him. When's he coming? I said, I don't know when he's coming. And I just kind of, because I figured that was better to just kind of.
Sure. Yeah. Totally.
Than put her through that.
And every day was the same. She completely it was a new day. She didn't remember the day before.
Yeah, it was a new day. Yeah.
Is it only the highly autistic people that are telepathic like that, or are there any non-autistic people that are like this?
There are people who are, there are people who aren't autistic that have these abilities. It's just that the ones who are autistic are the ones who have it to the highest degree. Okay. Another thing I'm interested in studying, though, is these other abilities they have. Like some of them are reportedly highly precognitive. Mm-hmm. That they're, all of these anecdotal stories. If you listen to the telepathy tapes, you'll hear of some of them on that. There's this one young woman I'm working with. She's 19, and she had, in her mind's eye, she saw her father getting into an accident where he slipped on ice, broke his hip, and ended up in a hospital. And she told her mother about it, her mother and father about it, and they were living in Arizona at the time, and and there's not a lot of ice in Arizona. Mm-hmm. But then he went on a business trip 6 weeks later and slipped on ice and broke his hip and ended up in the hospital. And
a lot of precognitive stories like that.
Yeah. So what I want to do is study the precognition, mm-hmm. And so we have that capacity to do that. It's just like she can tell me, whenever she gets, those kind of visions, and then we have that recorded. We have a timestamp. Mm-hmm. This is when the mother sent me the email telling me about that, for example. Okay, and then we just see, they have a hard time telling you when exactly something's going to happen, but then just see. How does that evolve? So that it's documented and it's not just I'm hearing the whole anecdote and that as something that happened in the past, but actually ongoing. Do that kind of research. The same young woman who's doing that. I mean, she's working as with police as a psychic detective to find missing children.
Oh wow.
So I'm very interested in. How that plays out. Okay, and once again, having, documentation, I can contact the police department or whoever it is that, she was working with and say, okay, tell me, and you'll see the documentation for it, looking at things like that. Another thing I'm interested in is many of these children, reportedly, see dead people. Mm-hmm. And I've only once asked one of them, would you do a reading on me? And it was when I was in a Zoom call with this mother and this son, and the mother mentioned that her son, does mediumship readings for friends of hers. Mm-hmm. And I said, oh, that's interesting. She said, and he's really got people, amazed, and it's been really helpful for them. And I said, oh, that's interesting. I said, well, could you do a reading on me? And this is literally within the first half an hour of meeting him on a Zoom call.
How old is he?
Oh, he's like maybe 20, 21.
Okay.
And he said, sure, And then I said, okay, who do you see? And he says, well, there's so many that it's a little confusing. He says, this one woman tells me she's your half aunt. Well, my father had a half sister. And he described her, and I thought, well, that's interesting, And then he said he saw my grandfather by marriage, and his name was Harold. And my father's stepfather's name was Harold. And so I was like, wow, that was two highly specific statements, both of which were very accurate. And so once again, it makes me go, okay, well, that's something that, I would love to do research on that as well. So it's not just the telepathy. One of the problems with the telepathy is so many of them, they need to use the letterboard to communicate. Right. And then that creates all this suspicion, because
Yes.
It's the letterboard. But this boy's mother didn't know anything about me, certainly wouldn't have known about any of my dead family members. Mm-hmm. And so it doesn't matter if they're using a spelling board. Mm-hmm. They're just they're a unit together. It doesn't matter if you're looking at precognition either, because neither of them should know the answers to these things. Mm-hmm. And so I'm actually, more interested in moving beyond just the telepathy because of the challenge. I've already seen, really strong demonstration of that with the kind of setup that I could get, and short of being able to get them in separate rooms, mm-hmm. which I would love to see. But in the meantime, I'm not going to be, that's one of the things I was waiting around for since I started doing this research, is to try to get that kind of separation. But mm-hmm. Now there's all of these other things that have been reported that are just as interesting, if not more so.
Yeah. Yeah, I would really love to see one of those experiments done with a stage magician there to see, because it's the stage magicians and the mentalists are the ones who are the biggest skeptics of this stuff, and they mm-hmm. all say they can explain it away and they can do this stuff themselves too, which is conflicting. So I really would love to see that interaction there and to see if they can. Yeah,
well, the people who do like mediumship, I'm on the scientific advisory board of the Forever Family Foundation, which is one of the places where they certify mediums. They do rigorous research. They have very high, criteria for whether or not they'd certify somebody as a medium. And so I know, the way you would set that up. Mm-hmm. And so, that's one of the things that I want to do. But I know that one of the ways in which somebody who's like a professional psychic or medium that goes out there, they do what's called cold reading, which is like they'll say something like, oh, there's somebody here who has, a lost loved one whose name starts with an M, and then, which,
they're searching.
They're searching,
Yeah.
and of course you're going to find somebody in the audience who, lost somebody named Mike,
right.
The odds are.
That's the problem. That's one of the biggest problems with this stuff is there's charlatans.
That's right.
Everywhere.
That's right. And so, So that's a cold reading, which, you can, I think I could probably do a cold reading, so I don't give that a lot of credibility, I have a pretty good ability to read people, but I wouldn't call it psychic. I just know how to read information that, is on people's faces, et cetera. Yeah, that's what I've done for a profession.
You're a black belt human reader.
Literally wearing a black belt. But this boy, when he did that reading on me, there was nothing that he did that was anything like a cold reading.
Right. He got straight to the point.
He just went straight to it. Straight to it. Your half aunt is here, and someone named Harold, who's your grandfather by marriage.
And this kid has no developmental issues like autism or
no.
Like
he's autistic.
Oh, he's autistic. Okay,
he's autistic. That's what I'm saying. His mother and he were using the spelling board, but it's not. You can't accuse them of colluding together with some kind of code between them, which is what some people accuse them. When neither of them knew me from Adam, and it's not public knowledge. These relatives of mine.
Right.
I mean, I didn't even know I didn't even know my father had a half sister until like 25 years ago.
Wow.
Because my father had cut off his relationship with his father after his father remarried. So I didn't even know that branch of the family had existed. But when my father, when I was doing genealogy, that's when I found out about it.
Right.
And by the time I found out about it, she had already died from cancer. So anyway, so it's not something that's out there in the public record, and so that's, and to me, in a way, that's a more interesting question, because then I can come up with ways of explaining. I can come up with ways of explaining this sort of telepathy thing, even if I had them in separate rooms in the same house, as I said, because if these kids have such super hearing that they can even hear sub-vocalizations that a microphone doesn't pick up, then, even having them, separated like that, it's not going to eliminate that as a possibility.
Sure.
But mediumship? And that suggests something about the nature of, our existence. Do we survive after? Yeah, do we survive in some form after we, or we drop our bodies? And that to me is a more interesting question.
Yeah, that's one of the biggest questions.
Our brains are navigating informational fields that are, we live in a sea of information. Okay, think of it as like the quantum vacuum fluctuations. There are all of these waves out there that contain information within them. Okay, and our brains are helping us to navigate that. And these waves are, it's light and vibration. Right? And all of our sensory systems are picking up different frequencies of light and vibration. Sound is, the microtubules are, in the cilia, in the hair cells, are, they're differentiating different frequencies of vibration, and our eyes are differentiating different frequencies of light. We're only seeing a narrow the visible spectrum of light, but that's not all the light that exists. Similarly, we're only hearing, a fraction of the amount of vibrational sound that's out there.
Right. Our senses aren't able to pick up the others.
And then if you look at, just even the sensation of touch, once again that you're picking up information that is encoded in vibration. And so it's all about waveforms. And so our senses are giving us information from that, and then but only a narrow spectrum of it. And so there's all this other information out there, which is what we think of as non-local. Okay, because our sensory system is just, it's oriented to here and now.
There's a funny theory. Have you ever heard of Joe Rogan's fart hypothesis?
No.
So he has this hypothesis called the fart hypothesis that is like, imagine how many things are out there floating around that we just don't have the organs to perceive, right? Like someone farts, you have this plume of like disgusting smell, but we have this nose that has evolved over time to detect danger, whether it be like fires or gas leaks or prey coming at us, whatever it is. So we have this extreme sense of smell. We're able to detect this thing. But what other stuff is there that we haven't evolved the sensory organs to perceive, right? Like when a dog is in a house, or a cat can like sense a weird, like sense something, like even when you're in a room in a house, like the energy, it feels off in here, right? Like something feels off about this location, like where we're at. This room feels spooky. Like maybe like we're just getting a little bit of so-called smell that we can't smell, right? That we don't have the organs to perceive, like some sort of like what you're saying, like an energy or some sort of a weird vibration that we haven't, we're not evolved to pick up or translate.
Yeah, I mean, our brain, how it works is it works on pattern recognition, right? Whether we're talking about how I recognize your face, and it may be that I could, see you 10 years from now and you've aged a little bit, but, but I'd still recognize your face.
Right.
Or for example, well, anyway, you get the idea. You can hear a piece of music and it's somebody else's take on that song, and you can quickly go, oh, that's so and so song. It's just a new
right
version of it. So we're picking up patterns, and so, but what we can pick up patterns without even, it feels like we're guessing because we don't understand it as the same kind of perceptual process with, we're so visual that like when we recognize a pattern visually, we're more convinced that we experienced it because, more of our brain is devoted to vision than any other sense.
Right.
But there's this woman, for example, who she can tell if somebody has Parkinson's disease by smell.
Whoa.
She's like 100% accurate.
One woman.
Yeah. She's a Scottish woman.
She's still alive?
Yeah. Yeah. And she, if you look, he's on it, right? Yeah. She can tell if somebody has Parkinson's disease by smell. And so what scientists think is that there must be some, chemical that's in the,
Woman who can smell Parkinson's helps scientists develop tests. Scientists drew on 72-year-old Scott's rare condition to help identify people with neurological conditions. Scientists have harnessed the power of a woman's hypersensitive sense of smell to develop a test to determine whether people have Parkinson's disease. Whoa.
Yeah.
She noticed that her late husband developed a different odor when he was 33 to 12 years before he was 12 years before he was diagnosed with the disease, which leads to part of the brain become progressively damaged over many years. Wow. And I assume they tested this on lots of people.
Yeah, they tested this on lots of people, and she also diagnosed somebody years besides her husband, somebody else years before he developed the condition. And so the point is that if you asked her how she was doing that, she, she just does. Okay,
right.
Just like a mother of a newborn, okay, an infant. Mm-hmm. There was this study that was done, decades ago, where they took, their little nighties, little night T-shirts, that you put on a baby, they took those from like 10 babies, mm-hmm. and then they gave them to mothers and said, just smell this and tell us which one belongs to your baby, and the women were able to match it.
Wow.
And yet,
that's so crazy.
And so even though you're not thinking about it, there's a pattern there. Okay, there's there's all of these different chemicals, I'm sure, that go into your particular baby's smell. That you just got this pattern right, and you're not having to think about it, and it even feels like you're guessing, but you're accurate. And so we've similarly discovered that people can detect as little as 1 photon of light, but you don't see the light. Okay, it's below. It's not enough density of light for you to actually visually see it. But if you say to people, did the light flash just then or not? They're very accurate in being able to detect. That's a form of detection. To just, it's just like, as I said, it feels like you're guessing.
Right.
Similarly, there's a condition called blind sight, this is not mind sight. Blind sight is a condition in which people, their visual cortex is damaged, and they're blind because that part of their brain isn't working. But if you put something in front of them, like a picture of a circle or a cross or whatever, they could tell you if it's a circle or a cross. It feels to them like they're guessing.
Wow. But
the information is still getting into their eyes and still getting into other parts of their brain that can do a rudimentary form of, vision, even though they're not having the conscious experience of vision. So the point I'm getting at is that there's a lot of things that can be below our threshold of awareness that gives us information, and I think that's pertinent to this whole question of to
your smell, to the thing you said about smell. I had a woman on here describe to me how there was a study that showed how women, there's a pheromone or some sort of a smell that attracts women to men. Something about the pheromone or whatever the smell is. I forget the word. There's a specific word she used that the men emit. It's a subconscious thing that attracts the woman to the man, and it's all based on immune systems. So the smell of the man means his immune system matches hers, which means it fills in the gaps where hers lacks for procreation. So if they were to create a baby, that baby would have a very robust, strong immune system for evolution, which blew my mind.
I think it was that if he smells good to her, then that is true.
Yeah, they did this study with like T-shirts of men, and they let the women smell it. And which one is more attractive to you?
That's and smell. Smell is the only sense that bypasses the thalamus. That doesn't. Let me say this: all of the senses go to the thalamus, which is like our relay center. And it's where we have sensory gating. Okay, is mainly associated with the thalamus, although. But smell goes right to the limbic system, and the limbic system is involved in things like memory, and emotion. Okay, and so that's one of the reasons why smell of all the senses can be the most evocative of emotions and memories for us, and so. One of the things
is weird how that happens.
Yeah, and I remember hearing about this study that was done a long time ago that relates to what you're talking about, which was that there is this, based on smell, that there is more of an attraction to mating with someone who is not your relative.
Right. Exactly.
It's a way of reducing inbreeding by using the sense that is the most associated with these raw emotions, and smell plays a huge role. And it's a lot of the the perfume industry. Some of the perfumes, actually would use pheromones.
Really?
Yeah. Yeah. Because why does a woman wear
males
perfume?
with strong immune systems just bottle their scent?
Well, it's, I mean, it's, there's pheromones that a woman emits that also,
Yeah.
attracts a man, and they've got kind of more of a musky kind of, the ones that use pheromones have more of a musky smell. But at the same time, we also live in a society that has become kind of anti-olfaction, other than, smelling food cooking or something like that. But we've made human smells something that's dirty and undesirable. And
every morning when I'm laying in bed half asleep, I wake up to my wife sniffing me like a dog. She's like, she says if she could bottle my scent, she would.
Oh my goodness. All right. Wow. Well, there you go.
Very strong scent attraction there.
Oh,
going on.
wow. Well, then
I think she's really weird.
Well, you have no worries. She'll never cheat on you.
It's funny.
I also see more and more people interested in developing their own innate abilities, their own innate intuition, their own, these abilities that I think our ancestors had developed to a very high degree. That's how they survived. Mm-hmm. A lot of these indigenous cultures still have these abilities,
which still exist, by the way. They're still roaming around different parts of the earth, in the Amazon rainforest, Sentinel Island. That's crazy. It's crazy that we can live in this technological world that has autonomous cars and drones delivering your Amazon groceries. At the same time, there's people running around naked in the rainforest shooting 7-foot arrows at anyone who tries to get close to them.
Yeah, and and one of the things that I wonder about, when you hear of things like, the what's the name of that device, the Antikythera or whatever?
Oh yeah, yep, the device they found in that ship.
Yeah, which was a very, very sophisticated, It
was like it was like an astronomical alignments. It could do. Yeah,
yes.
It looked like gears.
Yes.
Inside of a clock.
Yeah.
That it is. Antikythera.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. 2,000-year-old device, okay, that really showed that they understood the astronomy, and could, predict when eclipses would occur and whatnot. Well, what I suspect is that human beings were far more technologically advanced thousands of years ago than we realize, and that a lot of that knowledge has been lost. And it's possible that, who knows? It's possible that they had some of this technology that got destroyed, like in a Carrington type event long ago, or a flood, or getting hit by a meteor, or something, such that only the people who knew how to survive in the forest,
right,
made it. And so then we started all over again, okay, and then eventually we just rediscover, similar technology or variations on it, and then we've worked our way up to, technological advances that increasingly people become dependent upon, that if some big event happens, it's going to be the people who know how to survive.
Yes.
Because the Earth will, look at what happened with like Mount St. Helens when, the volcano erupted and it, destroyed everything in its path. But within 10, 15 years, you already have plants coming back and animals are starting to come back. And, nature will find a way. But it's going to be in pockets, where people already know, have the diversity, the biodiversity, and already know how to live within that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it doesn't make sense how, some of there's ancient structures all around the world that have like crazy alignments and precision and stuff that like we can't compute with our technology today. It seems like they were certainly on a different trajectory technologically than we are. And we're trying to look at it through our lens and come up with theories on what the ancient world was through our lens. But I think you're right. I think the reality of it is there was something else going on that we probably can't understand. I don't think it was electricity and combustion and all these types of things that they were using. I think it's probably something that along the lines of, what is going on with these children and having some sort of knowledge that is not able to be put into language.
Yeah. I mean, who knows what they had? Because when we look at like some of these ancient cultures, like the megalithic cultures, I mean, we still don't understand today how they built those, and it makes sense though that those structures survived when you consider how massive they are, and et cetera, but that doesn't mean that their whole culture was like that. That's the totality of what they had. I mean, they could have had all kinds of other things that didn't survive.
Right. Yeah, 100%. Going back to what you were talking about with the sensory stuff, have you ever heard of the filter hypothesis, where it's the idea that our senses, our smell, our touch, our vision are all just filters to help us get through the world and to help us evolve. And essentially what's really out there is way more. Like there's certain scientists, brain scientists that I've talked to that do study with like extended state DMT, where they put people on an IV of DMT so they can sort of like map the DMT realm, whatever that is. And they believe that whatever is happening there is like melting away these filters that we have, our sensory, our vision and our smell and all that, and exposing us to more of what could be really, really there. Right?
Yeah, absolutely. That's, the idea of the brain operating as a filter is, that's been around for quite a while. I mean, decades, that hypothesis. And we know that our sensory system, only picks up information within a really narrow spectrum, whether you're talking about sound or light. And what happens with DMT is it does change the sensory gating, that's going on, okay? And it does so in a way that is so similar to what these autistic individuals I work with describe as their day-to-day reality. In other words, people who do ayahuasca, they describe having synesthesia.
Right.
Well, all of these autistic individuals have synesthesia.
Really?
Yeah, and in fact, they tend to have more than one form of synesthesia. They see auras around people and animals, and they see colors around letters. They hear sounds associated with colors. All of these different things are blended together for them. So it's I think of it as being almost like a kaleidoscope world.
Right.
And then another thing they share in common with people who do ayahuasca is that there's a mind-body disconnect. They don't feel totally within their body. And
right.
And so so that's another similarity. And then a lot of people, when they do, psychedelics like, psilocybin or ayahuasca, they'll experience telepathy as well.
Yep.
And so, and then we know that the brain makes, DMT. It's an endogenous neurotransmitter.
The lungs as well.
Yeah, it's just like, cannabinoids, or, we have endogenous cannabinoids and endogenous opiates. And, so, we have all, the reason why these synthetic things can work on us is because they're mimicking something that's a natural compound. And so one of the things that I'm going to be looking at is, looking at these endogenous DMT like compounds in autistic individuals, to see if there's something different about that system in them, because what they describe is so similar.